Hi everyone, welcome to my channel, or welcome back to my channel. I'm Amma Mama. I am today going to do my wrap up of everything I read in February. And as I go through the books that I read, because I read so many, I'll still say a little bit about them, but most of them I've given some sort of like a more in-depth update. So I'm going to talk about them a little bit, but I ended up reading 12 books in February. And so I'm not gonna go quite as in-depth, or else this would be a very long video. I'm also going to, at least in my wrap-ups, I'll probably not do this in all of my video, but at least in the wrap-ups, I'm probably not gonna share like a star rating per se. I think I'm just gonna say whether like I would recommend it, highly recommend it, or would not recommend it, along with some of my thoughts about it. Because some of these, again, like my star rating may not mean a whole lot to somebody else depending on your taste. And so I know what I've rated them, and I may still share those on like my weekly vlogs that I do. But on a wrap up like this, I'll probably just say if I'd recommend the book or not, with some information. So that'll be a little bit different this time. The first two books I'm going to talk about are ones that I read on my Kindle. The first book I read was called My Evil Mother. But My Evil Mother was just a short story. In that one, there is a girl and she grows up basically believing that her mother was a witch. And it's just a story about motherhood and the way this woman kind of copes with being a mother, and some of the struggles and things like that. And the young girl, like her relationship with her mom, non-existent relationship with her dad when she's young. And there's a lot of stuff that, especially with it being a short story, I can't really share a lot of information, because there's some things that happen that you really need to read it so that you can get the full effect of the story. But overall, I liked it. It was, it was pretty good. I had the Kindle version, but I also was able to listen to the audio version, which is what I did. And like I said, it was really short. It was under, I think it was under an hour to listen to the whole thing. And I would recommend it. I mean, it wasn't, again, it wasn't super in depth. It's a short story, but I think it made some good kind of points, especially at the end of the story. So I would recommend that one. The next books, I'm kind of reading them in order that I have them, I'm reviewing in the order I have stacked here, which is somewhat kind of like the reverse order of how I read them. So I'm kind of going backwards, but I decided I didn't want to try to restack them, and this is the order they were in. So the first book I'm going to talk about is Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency. And I had gotten this as a used copy from Thrift Books, which is fine. But it's like a very old, printing. This one was from, I want to say, 87. And so like it fell apart while I was reading it. So I'm going to have to get that fixed somehow, or I don't know, glue it back in. I'm not sure. I don't really know a lot about binding. And like I said, this was an old copy, but I had mentioned before in, when I did kind of my weekly wrap up, there was a TV show on BBC that I had seen for Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency, and this is by Douglas Adams. And I loved the TV show. It's very, it's very weird, and it can be a little bit hard to follow, and the sense of humor is, it's just different. But when I found out it was a book, I wanted to read it. I really enjoyed this story. I would recommend it, but it can feel a little, this one especially, it was a little choppy to get into, because there was so much jumping back and forth between so many different people and places and things that were happening, which again is kind of how the TV show was too. But it took a while for me to really get into, not the book itself, but into the story of like how it was happening. And Dirk ends up having to solve, he's trying to solve a couple of different things, but there's something involving like a piece of pottery and I forget what is in it, at a dinner party that gets broken open, and he's trying to figure out how it got into the pottery. And it's not just a simple magic trick. And so there's that stuff. And I don't know, there's just a lot of different things that go on. I feel like it's hard to really talk about any one of the things without having to talk about others, which might give away some of the plot points. So if you don't mind kind of the back and forth and a little bit choppy and like weird situations, it was good. Again, I wanted to like this first one a lot more than what I did. But I still enjoyed it. It was still a good read. And this one I think I found the audio. Oh no, I remember. I wanted to listen to them on audio because I did find copies of this one and the next one I'm going to talk about, which is another Dirk Gently one. But both of the audios were abridged versions, and so they cut out a lot of stuff. And if you read the book and then like what I did is I listened to part of one of the audio chapters and then I read the book to see what was cut out. And you'll realize like why they cut out the parts that they did. But I feel like that stuff also kind of made the story. So it was just, this one was kind of bizarre. It was just kind of bizarre, but I would recommend it depending on, I don't know, depending on your taste. And if you mind or don't mind a little bit of jumpiness before you really understand what's happening. So then I also read, also by Douglas Adams, The Long Dark Tea Time of the Soul. And this is the second Dirk Gently book. And Douglas Adams is the author of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So if you've read that or are familiar with it, you might like these books as well. I actually liked this one a lot better than the first one. The storyline was a little more coherent. You still have that like jumpiness between the things, but it felt more like one overreaching story. And so kind of the premise with Dirk that I think I can use to explain is that he believes in like the interconnectedness of everything. And so like even down to if he needs to go somewhere, he will not use a map or anything like that. He has this idea that if he just picks a car where they look like they know where they're going and follows it, he'll get to where he needs to be. It may not always be where he was trying to get to, but then it ends up being where he needed to be for whatever he's doing. And so he finds the ways that like it's all interconnected. And so what makes the books kind of fun is that like as you do unravel with him the mystery of what's going on, you start to see how these seemingly unconnected events have all touched each other in some way and led to the conclusion that you wouldn't have understood or seen if you had not been paying attention to all those weird little connect points that we would maybe overlook. So this one, was my favorite out of the two. I would definitely recommend this one for sure. I'd recommend it a little more highly than the first one, in my opinion. And this one has to do with, it's got some Norse gods in it and some things that happen. And so again, I can't really say a whole lot because it would give away a lot of the story. Plus it would just be too complicated to try to share, but it was really good. And I did enjoy this one. The next book that I read was She, 5 Keys to Unlock the Power of Women in Ministry by Carolyn Lewis. This book, I would say, if you're a woman in leadership in church, not even just as like a minister, but anything, I would definitely highly recommend this. It's got a lot of good points about how women need to, understand their position of power, where they're coming from, how to explain their viewpoints on the Bible, and where you see women in power in the Bible and ways that in our society men have always been predominantly shown as the only ones who can or should be in those leadership positions, which is not true. She goes into some information about how, we, even with Paul, like some of it is kind of taken out of context in his letters because they were written to a specific church in a specific city at a specific time when he would tell them things about women in ministry. But then people will forget about the fact that he worked with other women who were also in ministry, that when he sends them to places to be, he tells them, like, take care of these people as well. They've served alongside me and all of that. And so there's just a lot of good points. So, if you're someone who, and even if you're not in ministry, if you're in a position where you have power in any form as a woman, a manager, a business owner, anything like that, I'd still recommend this because there are points in it that I think you could take away for leadership in general. But definitely, it's written more specifically for women in ministry, but I could see where you could use some of this for regular leadership as well. So I would highly recommend this. It was a really good read with a lot of good information. Then I read Firefly Lane by Kristen Hanna. And this one I had read because I had seen the first season on Netflix. I really liked it. I decided to read the book. It follows the story of Tully and Kate when they meet as young girls through their whole lives, basically. If you've ever seen the show on Netflix, the book, at least from what I remember from the show, it's been a few years since I watched the first season, but the book is way different in some aspects than the show was. And I liked the book a lot more. It definitely had, it had some humorous parts, but it really pinpointed different points in their life as far as struggles and friendship and marriage and worries that you might have as a woman and a mother, and struggles. And it was just really, it was really good. And it definitely made me cry at the end. I guess there is another book after this one, but I'm not sure I want to read it because based on some of the reviews, I feel like maybe the sequel was unnecessary. Like, I feel like the way this book ended, it should just be done with. So I don't think I'll read the next one. And the next one didn't get as high of, reviews. There are parts that definitely are, very extreme. Like the success of one of the women and stuff like that is like over the top for what might be considered like real life or whatever. But I think it needed to be that way for so many of the things in the book and to really help move that storyline along based on, I think, where she was going with this. So this I would also highly recommend. It was really good. It's a pretty thick book, but it wasn't super difficult to read. There were some things because of the content emotionally that I would like read a chapter and maybe put it down for a few minutes and then I would pick it back up. So it was good though. I would recommend it. This next book, I have it in here just because my son and I finished it. If you have any, it's probably written for, 8 to 12-year-olds maybe. It's Boy of the Pyramids, A Mystery of Ancient Egypt. And we were reading this as part of what we did for history, but my son really liked it. And so I told him I would also include this in my wrap-up video. But it follows the story of a young boy, Coffee, and some adventures that they go on and some ways that they help his father stop someone who is stealing from a grave of a pharaoh. So it was a good story, and it's a good way to kind of get some of that Egyptian history and lifestyle information, how they lived, how they worked their crops, the Nile River, all that kind of stuff. But my son really liked this, and he's 10, and so and getting ready to go into the 6th grade. And so actually he's almost 11. He has a birthday next weekend. But anyways, he really enjoyed this, so I told him I would include this. Then I read The Outsider by Stephen King. This book was so good. I would highly recommend, especially if you are a King fan, if you haven't read this. It was really good. There was a TV show, like a little series on HBO that I don't remember if I ended up watching the whole series or just most of it, but it seemed like for a big chunk of it, at least, the series followed pretty closely to the book from what I remember, for at least the parts that I watched. I would highly recommend this one. Like I was saying, there's definitely some things in this that can be hard to read. I talked about it a little bit when I discussed it before, but it's following this man, Terry Maitland, and he is accused of murdering a boy, and the boy is murdered in a very horrific, graphic way. And that's one of the things that I said, it can be hard to read, but the way King writes about it, even though you get the gory details of the murder, you're very detached from the child, in the sense that you were never introduced to him as a person. And so I don't know, I don't like reading about children being hurt in any way anyhow. But because I was able to be detached from it, it made it feel just more like okay, I got that detail and now I can move on. It didn't really stick with me throughout the story, if that makes sense. But he gets arrested in a very public manner because they're like, there's eyewitnesses who saw him with the child and all of this stuff. But then they realize they also have eyewitnesses and even television footage of Terry Maitland, in a completely different state, I believe a different state, but at least a completely different city, too far away to be where he was supposed to be at the time the murder occurred. And so now they're kind of like, how you can't be in two places at one time, what's going on? And so the mystery and it's also, it's a horror, but there's some mystery with that. So it all revolves around that murder and getting to the conclusion of that. And there's a lot more to it, but I would highly recommend this. It was a good read. And then I feel like I've talked about this a lot lately, but Cross My Heart, James Patterson. I would highly recommend this one as well, which usually with the James Patterson, these Alex Cross books, I would say I recommend them. They are good. They're not usually my absolute favorite, but I enjoy reading them. I usually listen to the audio version of them because I really like the narrator and how they do the stories. This one I liked a lot because it also had a cliffhanger at the end, which I liked. A lot of people apparently did not like that because usually these novels are kind of wrapped up neatly with a bow in some aspects. And so a lot of people that I saw reviews for really hated the fact that there was a cliffhanger, but I liked it. And so in March, I'm going to be reading the next one that continues with where this left off with his family and things like that. And so I'm looking forward to it, and I would highly recommend this. The next book that I read was Good Omens, and this is Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett. This is on Amazon Prime as a TV show. I read this. I'd seen Good Omens, which is how I had found out about it in the first place. I'd seen the first series and then just recently found out it was a book, so I picked it up at the bookstore, and I really enjoyed this. I would recommend it. I liked the book better than the show. The show did follow the book to an extent, but there are some things that are pretty different, probably for the sake of, maybe time and things like that. But I think they did a good job with the casting in the show. There isn't a second book, but there is a second series on Netflix, which from what I understand, when I kind of looked it up a little bit, the second series isn't really based on anything that, they were planning on doing, but there may be in the works a third series or a third season. And if there is, that one would be more based on the book that they would have written. I don't remember which author it was, but my understanding is that one of the authors had passed away, and so they never wrote a second book. But they had talked about it and ideas for it and everything. And so from what I read, just when I Googled it, if there's a third season, it would be kind of based on the book that was not written yet. But I definitely enjoyed this. I listened to, I kind of went back and forth listening to the audiobook, which I liked just because they had like whoever did it, they had a British accent. And so it just made it kind of fun to listen to it as well. But this was really good. Next, I read Being Henry, The Fonz and Beyond by Henry Winkler. I would highly recommend this book. I would say even if you don't know who Henry Winkler is, or who the Fonz is, maybe you recognize Henry Winkler, maybe you've seen him in other things. He's been in more recent television shows and things like that. But if you don't know, if you're too young to know who he is as the Fonz on Happy Days, I would also suggest go back and, watch some of the episodes of that, because then you'll kind of get an idea of who he was and why he was so famous when he started out. But he did a really good job with his memoir, and just so much good information. And he just seems like a genuinely good person. He's been married to the same woman for 45 years. He talks about his struggles with dyslexia, especially as an actor, because he can't read very well. And so to learn his lines, he has to go over and over and over them. And so he did a lot of improvising when he would be acting, when he was able to, just because, he talks about how reading and learning the scripts would be hard, especially if they did changes to them and he hadn't had time to really study and work on them. I liked that he never really badmouthed anybody in the book. He always seemed to be very respectful of the people he worked with. And if he didn't have something, really nice to say, with maybe one or two exceptions of somebody who had already passed away, he never really named names, which I really appreciated, because it seems like a lot of times people are very quick to just throw other people under the bus and smear their names around and all of that. And, it may be true, it may not be. There's always two sides to a story, but I really liked this. So I would definitely recommend reading this. If you're at all curious about him, his life, how he got to where he was, his family is Jewish. They emigrated from Germany. His dad tricked his mom to get her to the United States, but she remained very upset with him, probably their whole marriage, because not long after they left, her entire family was killed by the Nazis. And so, just hearing how he grew up and why his family was the way he was and things like that, it was really good. So I would recommend this a lot. Then I have The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse. And this was just a short little story about friendship. It's just got a lot of beautiful artwork, and it's handwritten, and it'd be a good book to have on the coffee table, something like that, if people came over, they could pick up and read a page or two. You don't have to read the whole book from cover to cover. I did, just to see kind of the progression of the friendship and how the boy met them. But there's just a lot of sweet things in this book. So I would highly recommend it. I mean, it only takes a few minutes to read, but it was really good. I liked this a lot, so I would recommend it. And then finally, I'm putting this in my wrap up for this month, or for February, because I finally finished the Complete Tales and Poems of Edgar Allan Poe. I started this book in September of last year, read one story a day, and when I got to stories that were longer, and or the poems, I would read for 30 minutes at a time. So I would recommend it. It was a good book. I would recommend it just in the sense of, if you like Poe, or anything, you know, there are, well, I don't know what to say. There are some stories in here I liked, some that I didn't really care for. And if it wasn't for the fact I just wanted to be able to say that I had read this whole book, I could see that I could have seen myself skipping on some of the stories that were like that were a little more, I don't know, scientific, or just things that I didn't really care for. A couple of them I found audio recordings on like YouTube of people reading them, and I would listen to them that way. But for the most part, I read most of this book myself, but I was not in a hurry to do it, and I finally finished it in February. Okay, so I'm inserting this because I almost forgot that I also read on my Kindle a book called The Druid, and that book is part of the Merbourne series, I think is what it is. Again, if I'm able to, I'll put the cover somewhere in here, and if not, I'll put the title and the information. That was a fantasy book that I had actually forgotten about, but not because it wasn't good. I'd read so many books, I forgot about that one. But in that book, you're following a girl who, she gets assigned, she's one of the lowest class, she's part of the lowest class in their society, but she gets assigned to be the servant to a prisoner who is also a druid, and it follows kind of the adventures of what happens while she's doing that, and some magic she learns she has, and just lots of other stuff. I actually really enjoyed that book, and so I do plan on continuing that series. I was a little bit surprised because I didn't think I would like it. It's kind of light for as far as a fantasy. Like, it didn't have a ton of world building. It wasn't super in depth, but not in a way that it made it like awful to read or anything like that. But well, no, that came out wrong. It made it like easy to read, but if you like really in-depth fantasy novels with a lot of world building and things like that, it wouldn't be for you. This was definitely more of like a, I don't know, if you just wanted something kind of light to read, but that was still fantasy, this would be a good option. I don't know if it's young adult or if it's adult fantasy. I didn't actually look. I think this was one that I had won as a giveaway on Goodreads, so I don't remember off the top of my head, but I'm enjoying the book, and so I'll pick up the next ones and continue reading it because I do want to see what happens. So back to the rest of the video that I recorded. So like I said, I read a lot this month. I ended up having a lot of time to read because we'd gotten COVID, and so we weren't really doing a whole lot for almost 2 weeks because one person would get sick, and then a few days later somebody else would get sick. And so you know, we didn't do school for a couple of weeks, 2.5 weeks almost, and so I just had a lot of time to read, and that's why I ended up reading 12 books. I don't know how many I will, you know, actually read in March, but I have 9 books on my TBR for that. So if you haven't already, go, you know, watch that video. You can see what I'm doing for March. But I enjoyed having so much time to read. But I know a couple of times I was like, okay, like maybe I should do something else with my life because I feel like I'm just reading right now. But now that things are kind of back to normal, I'm also like, oh, I kind of miss having so much time to read. You know, you always want what you don't have, I guess. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you very much for watching. I'm glad that you came by, and have a wonderful week, and I will see you next time. Bye.